most foul and horrific of creatures imaginable. A vile creature that has devoured many a first-person shooter franchise and has helped reduce first-person shooters to the level of corridors and guys in differently colored shirts. But it was not always this way. Call of Duty, at its release in 2003, was one of the great first-person shooters of its era and surpassed many games that were released around the same time. So how did it become the COD monster, you may ask? Well, the road to hell is paved with both good intentions and urgent energy. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the very first Call of Duty, a game that predates sprinting, a game that predates regenerative health, and a game that predates all that is wrong with modern first-person shooting. So now, let's take a look at it.
Call of Duty was initially released in 2003 for the PC, and unlike many classic games that I missed, I was actually aware of this game at the time of its release, as it was showcased on the then popular and existent X-Play Gaming TV show. And I thought it looked awesome, mainly because at that time I was already a fan of Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Sadly, I never got the game, and to be honest, I have no idea as to why. The game itself was developed by Infinity Ward, a company that at that time had 21 employees working on the game. This of course was in 2002, and many of the employees had originally worked on Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Now the game's graphics look absolutely amazing for 2003, and that is mainly due to several technologies employed. For one, it uses the id Tech 3 engine.
The id Tech 3 engine is absolutely legendary, as it was used to power many of the legendary games of the early 2000s.
The game also used an AI system called the Conduit system that allowed the AI to carry out actions that would have once had to have been scripted. The game also used a special skeletal animation system called Ares, and by the great God of War does that show. Now for this game, the campaigns were the primary concern of the developers.
Well, we all know that would change in later games.
It should be noted that the multiplayer modes were designed in such a way as to be easy to modify, and a lead designer said that the multiplayer modes were written in such a way so that it was extremely easy for players to make their own modifications to Call of Duty multiplayer.
Yeah, you heard me right. They actually cared about the community back then. They actually wanted people to mod the game. By the great Ysmir have times changed. Are the graphics really that worth it?
Call of Duty is a first-person shooter of the highest quality. There is no regenerative health here, and there is no two-weapon rule either. You can carry two main weapons and a pistol at all times.
It makes a lot of sense to actually be able to carry a backup pistol, especially if your FPS hero can carry two long guns. And it also makes some story sense as well. In Halo, when Captain Keyes gives you his pistol, you don't want to have to just drop that on the ground. In fact, in the book, Master Chief carries it throughout the entire bloody game. And also, in Duke Nukem Forever, you really don't want to get rid of that sweet, sweet 1911, now do you?
One can definitely tell that this game has the same developers as Medal of Honor Allied Assault, in that the objectives of the game are more or less identical. You're going to be planting bombs and killing X number of enemies, or holding out against waves of enemies. Now, this arena-styled combat would later become a staple of modern FPS games. Here it's not so bad, and usually the arenas are massive, and it feels less like a box of enemies and more like a legitimate battlefield. The game also has another modern staple that got its start back in Medal of Honor Allied Assault: the super awesome scripted excitement moment. These moments are found all throughout the game, and while they're overused today, and really are just used to pad out the criminally short modern FPS campaigns, in this game, they serve to spice up the gameplay and are really as exciting as they are meant to be. And my favorite of the lot is this chase in a French jalopy, as it feels like you're some sort of 20s gangster running from the cops. Although that statement is a bit ironic, seeing as how you're running from the National Socialists, a regime so corrupt that it would make Big Al seem positively honest in comparison. The game also allows you to aim down sights, which was something that at the time was rather novel, and since the levels for Call of Duty are rather large and sprawling, it was necessary to pick off enemies from a distance. This game is also very scripted, which was another novel concept at the time. What this means is that the game is much more cinematic than previous FPS games, and irrespective of modern developments, it works pretty bloody well when done right. One of the big differences from Medal of Honor Allied Assault is the fact that you'll be fighting alongside other troops. Now, in Medal of Honor Allied Assault, you did on occasion fight alongside other troops, but never on this scale. And really, most of those troops died before the level was even over. Here, you feel like a legitimate part of an army, and the AI for the Blue Forces is actually pretty good. Sometimes too good, as they do like to steal your kills from time to time. But there are, of course, instances where they can keep you alive. The game has a pretty good degree of difficulty as well, and the enemy AI actually knows what they're doing, especially when compared with later CODs. Here, there is as much gameplay as any good FPS from the era, and the scripted events like people kicking open doors and things of that nature just serve to be icing on the gunmetal gray cake.
At this time, Infinity Ward really understood the concept of balance. This game keeps all the modern enhancements and all the classic concepts in proportion with one another so that they support one another instead of just take over the whole game. There's not that many scripted events, there's not that many super awesome exciting moments, and there's still plenty of shooting to be had. This is why this game stands the test of time and why other CODs are just throwaway games.
Like in just about any given COD game, there are dozens of different weapons to choose from, far more than in Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and the weapons are all modeled quite well as well, and do look a great deal like their real counterparts, although the Mosin's bent bolt is bent at the wrong angle. But then again, this is from an era when Infinity Ward had to use what they had and could not just throw money at the problem, hence why all the machine guns are MG42s. Furthermore, unlike in later CODs, the weapons actually differ from one another. Whatever next? And some weapons are actually better than others, instead of all doing more or less the same amount of damage. By far the best weapon in the game is the STG-44, the first select-fire rifle to fire an intermediate cartridge that was issued widely, otherwise known in political parlance as an assault rifle. Although this is a misnomer, of course. As you can see, I can assault a position with a bolt action. Does that make that an assault rifle? But politics aside, the second best weapon in the game is the PPSH-41, or the Pepe Shaw as it was known. It carries an absolutely massive drum mag and is very fun to use in the Soviet levels. In real life, this weapon was issued on a fairly regular basis as it was easier to manufacture than the Mosin and really gave the fascists a shock. One really cool thing is how the sniper rifles work. Unlike today, where you have to zoom in with the scope, the crosshair stays up even if you are not zoomed, and the weapon is more or less a one-hit kill, and makes for a very good secondary weapon in addition to a full auto gun. The two snipers are the K98 and the Mosin. The Mosin is the better of the two because you can reload it with a stripper clip, unlike the K98 where you have to reload rounds singly. Reloading a Mosin with a stripper clip with a scope attached is not actually possible as the scope is in the way, but then again it wouldn't be as fun if it was perfectly realistic, and it's cool that there is variety between the sniper rifles. Graphically, the game still looks damn good even to this day. The levels are wide open and sprawling with many little details to be found throughout. The game is of course linear, but not nearly as linear as COD would eventually become. The characters are all modeled well, and they have some absolutely kick-ass animations. One thing graphically that is somewhat disappointing is the fact that the M1 Garand is less detailed here than in Medal of Honor Allied Assault. And I'm not really sure why they didn't just add that tiny detail when they added tiny details to the other weapons. Sound design for the game is also excellent as well, with the various battles sounding like real battles. Just listen.
When you actually finish a battle, you almost feel drained a bit, because the difference between pitch shooting and silence is a major one, and really the lack of music just draws you into the overall experience that much further.
There is some music in the game, but it's just instrumental music that fits the time period that this game depicts. but half the time it just feels tacked on. And this is one of those games that really does benefit from not having a rockin' soundtrack.
And now, let's take a look at the story for the game.
Call of Duty takes place from 3 different perspectives: an American soldier, a British soldier, and lastly, a Russian soldier. What's interesting is the fact that the gun on the title screen changes depending on which soldier you're playing as. Each campaign has the player fighting across a variety of different environments, from villages to mansion houses, and damn, what a mansion! To even the battleship Tirpitz, and that particular level has got to be my favorite of the lot. Really, the campaigns have been lavished with attention, and the game itself feels like numerous World War II epics woven into one amazing experience. There are famous scenes from history and scenes made famous by World War II films, like the segment where you must hold a bridge until relieved. Hold until relieved. With all the complaints about microaggressions these days, one must wonder how people today would have handled the macroaggression of someone trying to blow them up with a tank. This game also introduces the later popular character of Captain Price, and just like in later COD games, you of course get into all sorts of trouble with him. And as you would expect, he is rocking that stash.
By far the best campaign of the lot is the one depicting the Eastern Front.
The Eastern Front was, and will hopefully remain, the single bloodiest battleground in history. Over 20 million Soviet citizens died on that front, and it's an aspect of the war that is glossed over by the West for reasons pertaining to the Cold War. This was where most of the war was fought, and this was where the German military was at last crushed. It was bloody, and it was brutal, and it was something that we in the West have a hard time even conceptualizing. It was a conflict between 2 rival dictatorships, and there were atrocities aplenty on both sides. The Soviet campaign starts up in a somewhat ahistorical fashion, with you getting off a boat and being given some ammo, but no gun.
Upon doing some research, I found this introductory to not be exactly accurate. The Soviet Union had access to plenty of guns, just not enough ammo. And while the Soviet Union was indeed brutal towards its infantrymen, they didn't just expect them to use their bodies as bullet sponges.
Even though the first part of the campaign has more in common with Enemy at the Gates instead of anything approaching true history, it's still pretty cool nonetheless. When you get on the beach, you find a sergeant with a Mosin who helps you survive the battle, and actually in the course of fighting that particular battle, he awesomely shoots a commissar that's trying to kill you for taking cover. After you survive the beach, you still won't have a weapon, although I feel this is a bit contrived, as you should at least be able to pick up something by that point. Eventually you do get a gun, and show the Hitlerites the error of their ways. Really, the Soviet campaign for me steals the show and shows an oft-overlooked part of history.
Call of Duty 1 is one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time, and has certainly stayed the test of time. Even though I played it many years after it came out, and after playing many different modern first-person shooters, I still found it to be an absolutely amazing game. Really, the concept of nostalgia can be a misleading one. A game from the past can be better than a game from the present, even without nostalgia working. And Call of Duty 1 is definitely one of the great games of all time, and I highly recommend checking it out. And so I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good COD 3 and good COD 4, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Call of Duty 1, please consider subscribing, and if you'd like to see a Let's Play of this particular game, check the links below. And if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue to bring you these great reviews.